Hi, everyone. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking about a healing modality called Rapid Transformational Therapy, or RTT. Our guest is Caurel Richards. She's a transformation catalyst and hypnotherapist dedicated to helping you become the best you can be. With an expertise in the holistic healing modality RTT, she guides you to heal past emotional wounds and unlock a brighter future. Over the past 2 years, Caurel has delved into the intricacies of chronic pain, offering clients a fresh perspective from their subconscious mind. Her passion lies in empowering those struggling with chronic pain to realize their inherent power and reclaim their lives. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be
Yeah,
here.
that's awesome. So, like I told you before we hit record, this is going to be a first to me to talk about RTT. So, we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I'd like for you to just kind of tell me a little bit about your experiences working with people with chronic pain.
Oh boy. It's been to be honest with you, it's on a range, right? There are certain people that have been having chronic pain, say for the last week or last 3 weeks, I'll say. And then you'll have individuals that have been having the same pain for the last 20 years. So it really does go on a spectrum. And the interesting part about working with people on that spectrum is that it always boils down to the very same thing.
Mm.
And that's the interesting part, because you would think because they're along the spectrum that it would be different, but at the end of the day, it's really them not feeling safe. It's more along the lines of them just not feeling as if they are capable of taking care of whatever need that chronic pain is representing for them. So it's very interesting just to see, just the dynamic responses that you'll get, but it always boils back down to that.
And I think that's really interesting. I think there is a huge correlation between emotions and the subconscious and chronic pain. You have a website, and on your website it says before it's physical, it's psychological. Before
Yeah.
it's psychological, it's environmental. Tell us
Yeah.
what you mean by this and how that's related to chronic pain.
Okay, so I want you to think about it like a plant. I'm really into pepper plants, into tomato
Mm.
plants. So I use plants as my way of explaining it. If you look at a plant, it needs what it needs to produce fruits, right? For it to give you its harvest. When it is that a plant is not in an environment that is conducive to it giving you or thriving to give you those fruits, what typically happens? You'll notice that the leaves start to wilt, they start to change color. Whenever they're in an environment that isn't working for them, then physically you'll notice. And that's really their way of telling you, hey, I need a little bit more water. I need a little bit more sun. I need something, right? There's something that isn't in alignment. There's something that isn't balanced. And in looking at it that way, and I know that we are a part of nature and nature is a part of us. So when I started to work with these individuals that were going through constant pain, I recognized that it was the body's way of telling us something. What it was telling us was really dependent on the individual that was sitting in front of me. And what I noticed is that in going through the process, it always boils down to a belief that they have, a belief that says, I am not capable of doing something. I'm not enough. I can't speak up. I am not safe. And because I'm not safe, I am now responding to you to tell you that there's something a little bit out of whack. And if it's out of whack, I need you to do something with that. But the unfortunate truth is that the response that most people go for is simply just a band-aid instead of going to where the real issue is, which I want to say it starts with environments, yes, because your body eventually becomes stressed. Your nervous system becomes very sensitive. And because of that sensitivity, you now respond psychologically to that stress. And that psychological response is, again, very subjective. And if it's subjective, it means that in order to get to the solution for that individual, you need to know what the story is that they are telling themselves and what role the chronic pain is actually playing for them. And when you get to that point, it's the easiest thing. So when they say chronic pain is very complex to resolve, in my mind, it isn't, because once you know the person's story, it's so easy. It's so easy to then know what solution they need in order for them to get to that point of resolution.
I think that's so interesting because it reminds me of all the times that I've heard before that when you're in chronic pain, your nervous system is just overactive because you're in fight or flight mode. So it's
Exactly.
exactly what you seem to be talking about, that your body doesn't feel safe. And
Yeah,
I often refer to pain as a communication tool. It's not
exactly.
a bad thing, but like you said, it's trying to tell us something. Maybe it's trying to tell us that we have unresolved trauma from our past. Maybe we need to rest. Maybe we need to eat. Who knows? I mean, there's so many different things it could be telling us, but a lot of it, I think, is from the emotional side. I have read different, you know, articles and books, and they say that between 50 to 80% of physical pain is actually emotional pain.
Exactly. And
So
that's
yeah,
true. It is very true. At the end of the day, when the chronic, and I think this is the part that a lot of people aren't aware of, that the chronic pain didn't just start in the moment they thought it started, right? You were already conditioned in a way that allowed for the chronic pain to find that your environment, your physical environment, your emotional environment was the perfect situation to provide you with that pain, right? It's it's almost like it said, okay, well, yeah, you check these boxes. So here, yeah, this makes sense for you. For me, like chronic pain wouldn't have been an ideal thing because one, I'm very emotionally resilient, right? For someone that isn't emotionally resilient and maybe went through a lot of emotional neglect, they don't necessarily know how to navigate their emotions. They don't know, they're not really even aware of how to interpret what's going on with their emotions. I'm not saying that they're the perfect candidate, but it is likely that chances are they're going to have more chronic pain than the other person, I'll say for now.
right. I have heard that there are characteristics that lend themselves to people having chronic pain, like being overachievers, being perfectionists, being critical of themselves, things like that. All of which I am. So
Yeah. So it makes sense, right?
it makes perfect
It
sense.
makes total sense. And I think what we aren't recognizing, and you said it earlier too, it's communicating. But other than it just communicating, the chronic pain is doing something for you, right? And I want you to even look back at a moment where it does flare up and you're having those moments, and there's something going on in that moment. You might not be aware of it, and sometimes you probably are. And it's saying, hey, this is what I'm doing for you. And 9 out of 10 times, it's actually trying to protect you. And I
Mm,
know it sounds illogical to say that this pain is actually protecting me, but it is. I can't tell you how many times when we get to that resolution or we get to that understanding, people are looking at me crazy. They're like, what do you mean it's here protecting me? I'm like, yeah. I want you to think back in that moment where maybe you did something wrong, you needed to speak up and you didn't speak up. It wanted you to speak up, but you didn't. So it said, okay, you know what? Since you're not going to speak up, then I'm going to speak up for you. Maybe you needed attention and you weren't willing to ask for that attention. So it said, okay, well, if I give you this, then they're going to see something physically happening to you and then they're going to respond to that. So I'll speak up for you. But we're at a stage now where we don't need pain to speak for us anymore. And I think that's that outdated belief that is still there. Why, even if you are someone that is outspoken and you do get the attention that you need and you are able to take care of yourself, it's still there because it believes that you still need it.
mm. Yeah, I had a lady on another podcast, and she specifically was talking about how your body loves you, and to think about it like that, because like you said, it's trying to protect you from something, because
Yeah,
you're in this unsafe, or at least it thinks that you're in an unsafe environment, or you're in fight or flight mode. So your body loves you and is trying to do its job.
exactly. Exactly. The mind has one role, or one of the major rules, I'll say. One of the major rules is to do what you tell it to do. So if you've told it that you're unsafe, it's going to make sure that you're safe, and it's going to
Mm,
make sure it does what it needs to do to keep you safe, even if it doesn't make sense. And that's the scary part.
right. So what is rapid transformational therapy? Because that's something I have not heard of, and I've heard of a lot of different things. So I'm really
Yeah.
curious.
That is the moment I was introduced to rapid transformational therapy was the moment my life changed. Because as I am a practitioner myself, I also went through my own chaos because we all have our own stuff, you know. But rapid transformational therapy, and I say it this way because it's funny to me. It's like NLP, hypnotherapy, psychotherapy, and CBT basically came together and had a baby. It makes it so powerful. It's a process really, it's very holistic. It takes into account all aspects of the individual sitting in front of you, as well as all the modalities at this point that allow for it to get one to the root of the issue, as well as to give you an understanding of how this is actually, how do I say this? Benefiting you in some way, shape, or form, right? Because it's not just here for the sake of being here. It does think that it's doing something for you, and it's actually just allowing for you to get that understanding. This process is transformational, it's powerful, it's permanent, is the one
Mm.
thing that I love about it too.
So is it, are you able to describe kind of what it's like going through it, or is that just wait? Because like EMDR is really hard to explain,
Okay.
and I wonder if RTT is really hard to explain too.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
So, what happens essentially in a session is one, after going through what the issue is, we of course want to focus on what is the story that is being told as it relates to that issue. So, we're talking about chronic pain. So, I would go in to say, okay, the chronic pain is here. And now that it has a voice, this is what it's telling me. And then what will happen, of course, because at that point you're in such a relaxed state, which for someone that is experiencing chronic pain, that is foreign. Right? So it allows for your subconscious mind to actually be able to be the one that's communicating with me instead of the conscious mind, because right now we're having a conscious decision, we're having a conscious conversation, but with the process itself, everything is really us having a conversation with your subconscious mind, because you know that's essentially the blueprint of what's running your life. And since the subconscious mind is what has the information, then we start to speak to the subconscious mind. And in speaking to the subconscious mind, then we figure out where this chronic pain came from and we go back to a
Mm.
couple of scenes. These scenes essentially allow for you to see why it thought it needed to be created. And the truth about it is that this chronic pain was created by you, right? It was created by you for you. And at the end of the day, it can also be released by you. You are more powerful than you think you are. And I think that is the most important part about RTT is it shows how powerful you are. Because you go through those stories and you're like, oh my God, so I did that? And it's so crazy sometimes, but it's so impactful to see how powerful you are to come up with such a belief with something so simple. And through that simplicity, we then reframe those beliefs because they're outdated, as I stated. Most of the times, those beliefs don't make sense to the person that you are today. And once we reframe them, we release the pain. And once we release the pain, then we do a bit of healing. And even though the entire process is healing altogether, the most impactful part of the healing is the forgiveness part. It's the
Mm.
releasing of the shame, releasing of the guilt, because it's so interesting. Once you recognize that you've created it, you feel a little silly in the moment to be like, why would I create something like that? And you start to feel a bit of shame. And in that moment, you release that shame as well, because we make mistakes as human beings, especially when we're children. We don't have logics. And because we don't have logics, we're just going based on what we're feeling. You know, we felt like we were dying. We felt like we weren't going to survive. So this is the thing that made sense to us in that moment. And then we add new beliefs that will allow for you to actually reclaim the life that you want to live today. And then you get to listen to those this recording, I would say a little meditation for the next 21 days, which reinforce those new beliefs so that you no longer have to live that stagnant life that you were probably living before.
That's really interesting. And it reminds me of an Instagram post that you had. You said perception minus objectivity can create a false reality. So
Yeah,
talk about that and why that's important, because that seems to be related to kind of what you're talking about.
exactly. It's interesting when I posted that it had nothing to do with chronic pain, but it came full circle. We have a tendency as human beings, and I love us to pieces, but there are times where we forget that we've had experiences which have molded us into people that we are today. And we forget that we are still holding on to the pain. And in experiencing similar experiences, the pain comes up. And when that pain comes up, we no longer think objectivity up we no longer think objectively because the amygdala at that point is activated, right? And once the amygdala is like your, I call it the emotional brain activates and you're no longer thinking, right? So sometimes we really just have to catch ourselves because what we think is actually happening isn't happening. It's just that we are feeling a level of discomfort, a level of pain that we don't know how to cope with that. So we go back to what is familiar. And sometimes what is familiar is to the detriment of ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard the phrase feelings aren't facts before.
Yeah,
And I
they're
like
not
that.
facts, not all the time at least. There are times where your feelings are important. Your feelings can give you information, but not 100% of the time. And as a feeler, it really says a lot for me to say that.
Yeah, I bet that's hard. I guess I feel quite a bit. I just keep my feelings in, and I always have. And so I think that's one of the many sources possibly of my chronic pain too.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you're able to recognize and say that out loud, hopefully without feeling any shame or guilt, because it's the truth, right? And I know sometimes the truth feels uncomfortable. And the fact that you can recognize that, it means that you know already what direction to go. It means that you
Mm.
do need to speak up, right? And if you do speak up, what is it that you're afraid of? What are you afraid of happening if you speak up?
I don't know. So I was raised in an environment where I couldn't speak up. Um, I was told by my dad, like when I was a child, you're just a child. You don't have any reason to feel sad, or you don't have any reason to feel angry. Or if I had an opinion, I was wrong. You know, I was just a child. I wasn't basically entitled to opinions, and I didn't know what I was talking about. So I guess I'm just afraid of rejection now is a big
And
one.
yeah, and human beings, that's the one thing human beings don't want to they don't want to experience is rejection because when you were a part of the tribe, if you were rejected, it meant death, right?
Mm.
So it makes total sense why you wouldn't want to speak up. But of course, I'm going to push back a little bit and ask you, is that true for you today? And that's where the objectivity comes in. Is it true for you today that your voice doesn't matter?
It's not. I've also experienced some big T trauma where I felt powerless and my voice didn't matter. You know, I was saying no and they weren't listening. And so I frequently feel like I'm powerless, even though in my situation now, as a 44-year-old woman with a wonderful husband and a wonderful child, things are completely different.
Yeah,
And I could speak up. I can share my feelings and my opinions and my preferences and whatever I've got. And I am safe. It's just, I guess my brain doesn't fully comprehend that I am safe.
exactly, because it still has that story, right? It has everything to tell you that that's still your story. And that is
Mm.
what I we do through the process is that we change that story because the even though it happened and it's not to invalidate your experience, I want to make sure that I honor your experience because there is value in having your experiences. It's recognizing that it's no longer happening and it's releasing the pain that is attached to those experiences and telling yourself a new story.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds a little bit like EMDR, where you take a belief at the beginning what do you believe, and then what do you want to believe, and you work on focusing on things that you want to believe.
Yeah. And it has to make sense, right? And when I say it makes sense, it has to make sense for the person that you are and the life that you're living. You don't want to just add just
Mm.
random beliefs, right? It has to make sense to the person that is sitting in front of you. So, yeah, I could say that it's very similar to that for sure.
So tell us about your pain recovery program. I know that you have one, so tell us all about it.
Yeah, it's called Say Bye-bye to Chronic Pain.
Mm.
It says it, and I think when I decided to create it, that was the intention. I didn't want you to think about what was going to happen. I wanted you to know right off the bat what was going to happen, because it's not a question about if you're going to release it. It's about it when you want to release it, right? When you make the decision to take that first step. I have, to this day, not had any experiences that would have me even second guess this process that I use, which was, I don't know if I had mentioned it earlier. It was created by Marisa Peer. She's out of the UK, but I don't want to say it's a magic pill, but something magical just happens when you recognize the role that you are playing in your own pain. And
Mm.
it's like a light bulb goes off, and it says, well, if I'm causing this and I don't technically want this pain, it's yeah, whatever I need to do to get rid of it. And I'm not going to sit here and make it seem as if there isn't a moment where that part actually tries to fight to not be released,
Mm.
because it's been protecting you these entire times. It actually will fight you at moments, because it's like, well, I don't trust that you can now take care of that need that I've been taking care of, right? So it's going through the program. You're able to, one, discover and understand the story, discover the role that it is playing for you, release the pain, reframe that story, and then implement new tools, right? Because I'll use your story, for example. As someone that you you never really believed that your voice mattered, it's now giving you tools that tells you otherwise, right? And it's allowing for you to take step by step, sometimes even baby steps, to move towards speaking up in moments when you need to speak up, so that this pain, which chances are you're going to experience pain because we're humans, right? There's acute pain, but you're just not experiencing chronic pain anymore.
And I really like the fact that there are new tools that you teach, because I'm a very practical person.
Yeah,
So you can work on, getting rid of all my past stuff, but then what do I do now? So I think that's a
exactly.
really important element. So I'm glad you have that.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Because if someone didn't know, and I'll use the example of taking care of themselves, because this is the one that comes up often, is that they feel this sense of helplessness, hopelessness, that they're incapable of taking care of themselves. You now have to give them those tools to be like, okay, this is what it looks like to take care of yourself. And I'm very, very much saying yourself, because it's not about everybody else. It's about you. What do you, and we go back to the plant, what do you need to thrive as the person that you are? And it's also figuring out who you are, right? Because I think a lot of us are lost, and that's just the plain old truth. And it's finding your way back to you, and in finding out who you are and what you need to live in this world as you, then you get those tools. And that only comes from you. Like, none of that comes from me. I just sit there and I facilitate it, because I then ask you, okay, what do you need? And most of the times, what I hear is trust. I need to trust
Mhm.
that you're going to take care of this need that I've been taking care of. And what would that look like? It would look like, okay, when maybe you want to say no, but you're always saying yes, it looks like you saying no when you don't want to do something. And then you kind of have a conversation, and you go through, and even an experience, it's like we imagine you walking into a room, somebody asks you to do something and you don't want to do it. You get to role play and see yourself actually saying no, realizing that you are okay, that nothing happened to you. And it gives you that power, that realization, to the point where saying no isn't an issue anymore. So it's just not just telling you what the tools are, it's actually using it during the session and feeling okay to use the tools.
I love that so much. So where can we get more information about you and about your program and everything that you do?
Oh, well, you can find me on my website. First of all, it is In Divine Time, and I'll spell that out because it's very peculiar. It's INDIVINETHYNE.com, as well as on socials, it's the same In Divine Time.
Awesome. Thank you. I will have those links in the show notes so people can get to it easier.
Okay, awesome.
Well, thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome.
Make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, or life advice. For my freebie 30 ways to relieve pain without taking a pill, go to ithurtstomom.com/tips. If you have comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish everybody a blessed and pain-free day.